welcome to another edition of the TimeFlies podcast. I'm your host, Dariel. For today's episode, we're going to do things a little differently. We are going to be talking about basketball, but instead of having a guest with me talking about the NBA, shout out my guy Micah, shout out the boys from the Bonus Room podcast, Santiago and Steph, and shout out my guy Reed. It's going to be a little bit of a solo action today, if you will. And to get a little bit more specific, I wanted to talk about the New York Knicks and the upcoming season. There's been a lot of positivity around the Knicks organization, the players, the way they performed last season. But in order to give a projection as to where they're going to go, we of course have to look at where they've been so far. Before I get into talking about the upcoming season, I want to talk a little bit about the last season. So, for the 2022-2023 season, the Knicks finished 47-35, which landed them in the 5th spot in the Eastern Conference. They averaged 116 points per game, which was 11 out of 30 teams in the NBA. The opponents averaged 113 points, which landed them at number 13 of 30. As far as all-star selections, we had Julius Randle, which is a little bit, in the words of Stephen A. Smith,
it's blasphemous, okay? That's blasphemous.
A little bit blasphemy, because if you're a true hoop head, you know that Jalen Brunson deserved that all-star selection. Mid-season trades, the Knicks made one big move where they traded Cam Reddish, Ryan Arcidiacono, and Svi Mikhailiuk. I'm not even sure if I pronounced that right. And the 2023 first-round pick for Josh Hart, which was one of the better trade deadlines acquisitions. Josh Hart is a very tough-nosed, in-your-face, all-around garbage man, if you will. Like, he's willing to do the little things in order to help the team succeed, which somebody should adapt that mindset, a la Julius Randle. As far as for the season, Jalen Brunson finished averaging 24 points per game, 3.5 rebounds, 6 assists, attempting 17 field goals and hitting 49% of those field goals. He ended up averaging 4.7 three-point field goal attempts, hitting 41% from three-point, which is 41% in the NBA. That's really well. As far as free throw attempts, now this is interesting because I always look at the free throw attempts because that gives me a good gauge as to how aggressive the player was. Jalen Brunson averaged 5.8 free throw attempts, and he was 82% from the free throw line. Rounded up, 6 free throws a game, and he was hitting 82% of those free throws. So nice and aggressive. I do hope that number gets a little bit higher. Julius Randle for the season ended up averaging 25 points per game, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. He ended up averaging 18 field goal attempts, and he ended up landing on 45% field goal percentage for the season. Randle ended up averaging 8.3 three-point field goal attempts, hitting 34% of them. I would say if you're averaging anywhere between 34 and 38% for three-point field goal percentage, I would say you're a good three-point shooter. Anything above 38%, that's where you're a really good three-point shooter. And obviously the best shooter in the world, the best shooter ever, Steph Curry, he's consistently at 40% or more. Again, so now the free throw percentage. This is where Randle shows his aggressiveness all the time. He ended up averaging 7 free throw attempts and ended up hitting 75% of those free throws. The amount of free throws that he attempted, 7, is a really good number. I like his aggressiveness, but as far as where he landed hitting percentage-wise, those free throws, 75%, we definitely got to get those numbers up. And RJ Barrett, he had a more of the same season. I don't want to say disappointment, but a lot of Knicks fans, we want to see RJ truly flourish because we feel like if RJ solidified as that third main guy, the team could go far. But as far as the playoffs now, so first round against the Cavs, we know that the Knicks won in 5, which is pretty surprising. Going into the series, I believe I had the Cavaliers I had the Knicks in 7. I had the Knicks in 7, but I wasn't going to be surprised if Cavaliers won in 6. I just felt like Donovan Mitchell and the Twin Towers, I felt like they were going to give a hard time to the Knicks, but that obviously ended up being the quite opposite. They didn't. J.D. Bickerstaff, I believe, is the coach of the team. He had a really hard time of playing Jared Allen and Evan Mobley at the same time. Evan Mobley is definitely one of the bright spots for the Cleveland Cavaliers. The more seasons he gets under his belt, the more he's going to learn about using his different offensive tools. That guy is like a Swiss Army knife, man. That guy's going to be sick in a few seasons. But as far as the Knicks, so the first round versus the Cavs, we got the head of the snake, Jalen Brunson. He ended up averaging 24 points per game, 4.2 rebounds, and 4.8 assists. You could round that up to 5 assists per game. He ended up averaging 43% from the field, 29% from three-point. So that wasn't great. 95% from the free throw. So he was definitely hitting his free throws. He was being aggressive going to the rack. RJ Barrett ended up averaging 17.5 points, 4.2 rebounds, 2.8 assists, 44% from the field, 25% from three point, which is not great. Him and Jalen Brunson, that wasn't great. Surprised that those numbers where they were, and they ended up beating the Cavs. RJ Barrett ended up averaging 75% from free throw, so he ended up converging at a good rate. I do wish that number was high. Anything for free throws, me personally, I would wish it would be like 80% and above. Julius Randle during the season, he injured his ankle. He rolled it pretty bad, I believe, and maybe it might have been game 2. And then I believe he missed game 3 and 4, or it might have just been game 3. So the numbers on Julius Randle for the first round against the Cavs weren't looking great, but just please remember that he did have that ankle injury. So he ended up averaging 14 points per game, 6.5 rebounds, and 3 assists. 33% from the field, 23% from three-point, which isn't great, and 70% from the free throw line. It's like a common thing that I'm learning about RJ and Julius Randle. Like, their free throw percentage is not great. And like I just said, 80% for me, 80% and above is where I would like to see them land. Moving on to the second round, the Knicks surprised a lot of people when they beat the Cavs in 5. If they beat the Cavs in 6 or 7, everybody would have been happy, but let alone in 5, I don't think a lot of people were expecting that. Moving on to the second round against the Heat, with the Knicks lost in 6, Jalen Brunson, he went crazy. He averaged 31 points per game, he averaged 5.5 rebounds, and 6.3 assists per game. He ended up landing on 50% from the field, 34% from three-point, and 89% from free throw. Jalen Brunson was the third best player on the floor. If you remember, Tyler Hero wasn't playing during this time. Tyler Hero, he broke his hand in the first round against the Bucks. So if you're asking me personally, as far as the best players on the floor for the Miami Heat and Knicks series, you got Jimmy Butler, you got Bam, and then after that, Jalen Brunson's right there. Then the next in line, as far as the Knicks players having a good series after Jalen Brunson, we got RJ Barrett. RJ Barrett ended up averaging 20 points per game, 4.7 rebounds per game, 2.8 assists per game. Ended up landing on 42% from the field, 37% from three-point, and 78% from the free throw line. And Julius Randle, so the numbers in this series, they did go up because the ankle injury did heal up. So his numbers went from 14 points in the first round versus the Cavs. It went up to 18.8 points per game, 10.2 rebounds per game, 4.2 assists in the Heat series. He ended up landing on 41% from the field, 28% from three-point, and 71% from free throw. So again, Julius Randle in the first round was 70% from the free throw line, and now in the second round he was 71%. But what's really important is how many times that player gets to the line, because everything is kind of cohesive. Like, if the player's averaging a high number from the free throw line, you got to take a look at the attempts, because if he's averaging 85%, but he's only going to the line 3-4 times, you're kind of expecting that. But if a player's averaging going to the line 6-8 times, and then the player's free throw percentage is 85%, then we could look at it and being like, okay, he's being super aggressive and he's actually making it count. Now, looking forward, the projections. So after last season, the Knicks lost in the second round, and me personally, I had the Knicks in 7 against the Heat, but Jimmy Butler, when the playoffs come around, he turns into a different person. He pretty much becomes Thanos. He collects all the Infinity Rings, and he becomes Thanos, and then he leads his team to the NBA Finals. But if you're looking at the best players on the floor, you got Jimmy Butler, you got Bam Adebayo. To me, those are no question, the first 2 best players in the series against the Knicks. The third best player, Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson stepped up his game so much this season, and he had a lot to prove. You know, he had the whole thing with Dallas, where Dallas didn't want to give him the money, and then Jalen Brunson had those, I believe, 2 games against the Utah Jazz in the first round, the season prior to coming to the Knicks, because Luka had an injury, and everybody thought it was a fluke, me included. Everybody thought it was a fluke. He comes to the Knicks, he gets his big contract. A lot of people, especially Knicks fans, they're very, very, very intense with their players. They're very hard on their players. I don't care what anybody says. The New York Knicks fan base, we are basketball heads. We love the game, we love watching it, and we love analyzing it. So Jalen Brunson getting the contract that he got, a lot of people were a little worried giving him that much money, because he didn't really prove a lot. But after the past season, Jalen Brunson, what he did, everybody in New York has to shut up. I'm pretty confident in saying he's the best point guard the Knicks have had since Walt Frazier. And if you take a look at the point guards in Earl the Pearl, if you will, R.I.P. Earl the Pearl. Let's take a look at the noticeable point guards that the Knicks have had since Walt and Pearl. The first point guard we're going to look at Mark Jackson. So Mark Jackson had 2 stints with the Knicks. But Mark Jackson, what Jalen Brunson has that Mark Jackson doesn't is a stronger offensive game. Mark Jackson, you weren't looking towards for points. Mark Jackson was more of a traditional point guard. You can make an argument that back in those days, in the mid to late 80s, traditional point guards played like traditional point guards. They weren't like the point guards of nowadays where they're scoring point guards. Their main objective was to get into the game and set everybody up, put everybody in the best position, while also trying to make an impact on the game. We take a look at Mark Jackson and Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson's offensive game is above and beyond Mark Jackson. Mark Jackson didn't have a consistent jump shot. Mark Jackson didn't have a consistent, aggressive, getting to the rack kind of game. Mark Jackson's attributes, the biggest attribute he had was setting everybody up. He was one of the greatest and underrated players as far as getting everybody involved. But again, if we're taking overall skills into account, Jalen Brunson has the nod over Mark Jackson. The next notable New York Knicks point guard that we had, I was in high school when this guy came to the Knicks, Stephon Marbury. Now, Stephon Marbury is one of the most interesting NBA players of all time because Stephon Marbury, as far as talent alone, Stephon Marbury is one of the most talented basketball players probably to ever walk the face of the earth. But of course, you can't get through on your NBA career just on talent. You got to be able to add more to your game. Stephon's offensive game, you can make the argument that it is a little better than Jalen Brunson. I'm going to take Jalen Brunson because if you compare the offensive game between Steph and Jalen Brunson, Jalen Brunson's three-pointer, Jalen Brunson's aggressiveness is just on par with Stephon Marbury. Stephon Marbury getting to the rack was one of the most aggressive guards in NBA history. But now we got to take a look. We got to take a look at everything else that makes a player. We got to take a look at the player's poise. We got to take a look at the player's leadership, which it's no question Stephon Marbury did not have any poise, did not have any leadership. Just look at all the seasons when he was with the Knicks. Besides the first season when he got traded to the Knicks, I believe it was halfway through the season, they ended up making the playoffs, but they got swept in the first round against the Nets. And I believe that's the only playoff series that Stephon Marbury, as far as the starting point guard for the Knicks, was in the playoffs. Say Jalen Brunson's first season with the Knicks, he leads them to the second round of the playoffs, going to a Game 6 against Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat. Stephon Marbury, man, he could have been one of the best, but it's just a lot of things outside of the game got in the way, which is one of the things that a lot of hoopers are just they're a lot more aware of. That you gotta make sure that you got everything else off the court handled. That way you could go on the court and handle your business. After Stephon Marbury, the next notable New York Knicks point guard that I had in my list was Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose was past his prime. He came to the Knicks when Thibodeau got hired. Of course, Derrick Rose is his guy, so he wants to bring him along. But Derrick Rose, much respect for keep going, for keep pushing through, even after those horrific injuries that he had, all in the span of 3 years. But he was past his prime, and he wasn't the same player anymore. Solid offensive starting point guard, but he wasn't in his prime, so to me personally, you can't put him in the conversation as far as best point guards for the Knicks. After Derrick Rose, I had Rock Strickland. Rock Strickland is one of the underrated players of NBA history as far as if anything, he might be the Kyrie before Kyrie as far as handles, as far as attacking the rim and being able to manipulate how to lay the ball up. Kyrie is, in my opinion, the best basketball handler of all time. And it's funny because Rock Strickland is his godfather, so Kyrie definitely picked up a few tricks from him. As far as offensive game, Jalen Brunson and Rock Strickland, I don't think it's a question. Jalen Brunson's offensive game is night and day. The next one I had on my list, Chauncey Billups. Chauncey Billups, again, there might be a reoccurring theme here with the Knicks. Again, a little past his prime. He only played with the Knicks for half a season. It was with the Carmelo trade. They ended up losing to Boston in the first round. Amari ended up messing up his back, so Melo was kind of had to pick up the slack. And the Knicks, they didn't want to pay Chauncey, so they let him go. But we didn't have Chauncey in his prime, and Chauncey in his prime was in Detroit, where even in his prime, and you compare the games between Jalen Brunson and Chauncey Billups, I'm still taking Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson is just a little. Chauncey Billups is definitely a smart NBA player, but if we just take into account how Jalen Brunson gets his points. He knows when to attack the rim. He knows when to pull up. He can post up guards because he is small, but he's strong as an ox. Chauncey Billups is strong as well, but there's no fluidity to Chauncey's game. I think there's a little bit more fluidity to Jalen Brunson's game. Jason Kidd, the Knicks had Jason Kidd. That was when the 2012-2013 season when the team was Jason Kidd, Melo, JR, Amari, Kurt Thomas, where they made that run and they went to the second round against Indiana and they lost, which they should have won. But Jason Kidd as a starting point guard, he was past his prime. He already got his ring with the Dallas Mavericks. And I'm not saying he didn't care, because obviously he did care, but he wasn't able to offer as much as he could have if he came to the Knicks in his prime. If Jason Kidd came to the Knicks in his prime, he might be regarded as the best point guard of all time. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Raymond Felton is, before Jason Kidd got to the Knicks, before or after, I'm getting my years a little bit mixed up in my mind. But Raymond Felton was a starting point guard for the Knicks for a while. But I think we can all agree Jalen Brunson is better than Raymond Felton. If we take a look at the New York point guards that I had on my list and we compare it to Jalen Brunson's overall game, and you also got to include the leadership, you also got to include his poise and where he took his team. Like, a lot of these Knick point guards, they really just don't have the resume, and Jalen Brunson's only been with the Knicks for one season. Now, what I do want to move on to what a very, very key element into this upcoming season. Julius Randle. In my opinion, you cannot have a sustainable, successful team if Julius Randle is your first best player or your second best player. Julius Randle has to fit into that third slot, and the main reason why is because Julius Randle's game is predicated on offense. When you take away his offensive ability to put the ball in the bucket, his game becomes incredibly stagnant. And you can also tell on the floor he gets incredibly frustrated. Once his offensive game is not going, he doesn't have the mentality of trying to adapt to the game. If what you bring to the table is not working, you need to find other ways to get your teammates involved. You need to find other ways to lift up your teammates. Julius Randle's game is so predicated on offense that that's all he's able to offer. Now, Julius Randle took a step back and realized that teams are honing in on him and they're trying to take away his offensive game, a la his left hand, which I don't know why you haven't developed the right hand yet. But Julius Randle realizes that instead of trying to get his points, his buckets, why doesn't he try and actually be a decoy? Try and be a decoy and try and attack the rim to set up your other players. When you're attacking the rim, you don't always have to get yours, because when you attack the rim, the defense sucks in, which then leaves somebody else open, especially nowadays with the three-point. And RJ Barrett, this is where RJ Barrett can come and really help the Knicks. Julius Randle can attack the rim, suck the defense in, kick out to RJ Barrett, and then RJ Barrett, it's up to him in order to develop a consistent jump shot. RJ Barrett's strength is attacking the rim. The one thing I'll give RJ over Julius Randle is he attacks the rim with his right hand more than Julius Randle. You could cut off Julius Randle's left hand and he's still going to go left. Which, in my opinion, I don't know how you're a professional basketball player and you still do that. That's the one thing as far as Julius Randle that I wish that he was able to incorporate into his game. I just want him to be a little bit more open to helping his teammates out. Perfect example of how Julius Randle needs to adapt and he needs to expand his game. So in the regular season of 2020 and 2021, after the bubble season, for the regular season, he averaged 24 points per game, 10.2 rebounds, 6 assists per game, and ended up landing on 45% from the field, 41% from three-point, 81% from free throw lines. Now, that's the regular season. Now, let's fast forward within that season to the first round of the Hawks, where they lost in 5. Julius Randle went from averaging 24 points per game to 18 points per game. He averaged 11.6 rebounds per game, 4 assists per game. He ended up landing on 29% from the field, 33% from three-point, and 85% from the free throw. Well, Julius Randle at that time was the number one offensive option at that time. So whenever the opponent hones in on Julius Randle, all you got to do is take away his strongest attribute, which is the score, and then he becomes incredibly flustered, and it affects every other part of his game, as far as like uplifting his team, as far as trying to include his teammates into just making them better and making them overall threats. It just everything just seems to, it's like a snowball effect with him. One negative thing goes bad and everything else goes bad. I'm not comparing these two players because these two players are in absolute different stratospheres. But Kobe Bryant is regarded as one of, if not the best player of all time in some people's minds. Kobe in Game 7 of 2010 NBA Finals against the Boston Celtics, he ended up going 6 for 24 from the field. He ended up with 23 points, but guess how he got to those 23 points? He ended up going 11 of 15 from the free throw line, and he ended up getting 15 rebounds. So Kobe, in that game, I remember I was watching it live, he couldn't throw or rock in the water if he was standing on a boat. It was bad. And it's weird because Kobe's regarded as one of the most clutch players in NBA history, but in the most clutch moment, arguably in his career, Game 7, he goes 6 to 24. But he knows that his offensive game is not going, so he needs to adapt, and he needs to find other ways to help his teammate out. So what does he do? He becomes ultra aggressive, and he ends up going to the free throw line. He ends up making 11 of 15 free throw attempts. He also grabs 15 rebounds, and I believe 4 of them were offensive rebounds. So Just the mentality that Julius Randle, that I would like for him to adapt, is just whenever something goes wrong, it's not the end of the world. And on top of that, as being one of the leaders on the team, it affects the rest of the players. Like I keep saying, it's a snowball effect. As far as the upcoming season for the Knicks, a pickup that they had in the offseason, they signed free agent Donte DiVincenzo. And I think it was one of the sneakier signs because Donte DiVincenzo last season with the Warriors, they ended up losing the second round to the Lakers in 6 games. But if you remember, after the season, in the exit interview, Steph Curry, he said that the season was pretty much over when Draymond Green punched Jordan Poole. Now, having said all that, what they were dealing behind closed doors was so dysfunctional. It was obvious that Jordan Poole separated himself from the team because Draymond, being one of the leaders of the team, he didn't want anything to do with him. He didn't want to associate himself with Draymond, which I'm not mad at him for. But Donte DiVincenzo, Jordan Poole had an off year. And for him, an off year, I think he averaged 20, which is kind of crazy. But Donte DiVincenzo, during the playoffs specifically, I saw him pick up the slack. And he was one of the players that he didn't seem timid. He didn't seem like the light was too bright for him. Like, he knew his responsibility, and I think he flourished within that. And then the Knicks ended up signing him, which leads me to my next point. Now you got the 3 Nova boys. You got Jalen Brunson, you got Donte DiVincenzo, and you got Josh Hart. And I believe they were all on the same team when Villanova won that championship. Shout out Jay Wright. Don't be surprised if you see Jay Wright on the bench as an assistant coach. Now you got Donte DiVincenzo just sprinkling a little bit more chemistry within the team that they already got. And I don't know, man, if I'm going to give you an exact projection as far as like where they'll land, I think they're going to land the 4, 5, or 6 seed, and I think their ceiling is the second round of the playoffs. Last season, they lost in the Heat in the second round. It was more of a surprise. This season, I think it's a little bit more of an expectation for the Knicks to at least hit the second round of the playoffs. And one of the reasons why that's my projection is because the East is up in the air, man. You got Milwaukee with Giannis. The guys are getting old. Brook Lopez, Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday. They're getting old, and there's already rumblings that Giannis is not happy with Milwaukee. Like, he's already putting rumors out there that like the only way he'll sign back is if he knows that the organization is going to do right by him, and that if he knows that they're going to sign players that are 100% focused on the game. So Giannis is basically throwing a warning shot. Like, yo, make sure you guys do what you got to do, or else I'm out. You got Philly with Joel Embiid and James Harden. Like, let's put aside the whole James Harden thing. Like, I never believed in him. I never wanted him on my team. Joel Embiid is one of my favorite players, but Joel Embiid is injury prone. We're just going to put it straight up like that. He's injury prone. Every time in the playoffs, something always happens and he ends up going down. Miami, you always got to be wary of Miami. I don't care if they end up going 500 from the regular season. They will find a way to get into the play-in. They will find a way to get themselves into the playoffs. And then, of course, in the playoffs, Jimmy Butler becomes Jimmy Jordan. So I'm saying the East is open, man. The East is open, 4, 5, 6, and I think the expectation for this year is at least minimum, second round of the playoffs. That's my projection for the upcoming New York Knicks season. So I want to say thank you very much for checking out this video. And if you're listening to this on any of the podcast streaming platforms, thank you for listening. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that thumbs up. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to this on any of the podcast streaming platforms, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. All of the links will be down below for all the social media, Instagram, Twitter, Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter. All of the links will be in the description below. The Shia LaBeouf merch will be in the description below as well. So until next time, guys, thank you for tuning in, and I'll check you out in the next episode of the TimeFlies podcast. Peace, go Knicks!